Clara, you want to start as well with saying a few words about your background before I continue?
Sure. Yes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting us. So I'm a data journalist. It's been at Newsworthy for about just over a year now, and previously was at the BBC and before that at Google. So yeah, go ahead, Jens.
Yeah, and I'm the founder of Newsworthy, and I've been working as a journalist or a data journalist for some 10 years now. Newsworthy today is basically two things. We're a small startup still. One of the things we do is a news service for local and data-driven journalism, and as the slide says, with a lot of automation. I'd say that we do two things that are novel in terms of automation in this in the context of journalism. The first is that anytime we write an article, we write it in code, as you see a little piece of here. So when we write an article, we write an article that gets localized or personalized in typically 290 versions, one version for each municipality, or oftentimes one version for each county or län in Sweden. So that's one kind of automation. The other kind of automation is by building pipelines that lets us reproduce these articles every month or every quarter or every year whenever new data is published. So like typical topics that we cover are topics where you have data that can be broken down locally. So for example, unemployment, housing prices, and the whole Corona pandemic has been like a really good news cycle for us because there's a lot of data that's being updated regularly, and there's also that like local granularity that's of essence to us. So our subscribers are local newsrooms and local civil servants and politicians, and to some extent just general public. So that's one part of what we do. The other part, and the part that's to a larger extent paying the bills, is work that we do on commission for companies, organizations, and public bodies. So this morning, for example, we helped Alecta, the pensions company, do a news story on the fact that more and more people are working also at age 70, for example, and again here we help these organizations not only do news based on data, but specifically local news. So this press release, for example, was distributed to newsrooms in 21 different versions, which sort of paves the way for publications in local media. In this talk, me and Clara will take you behind the scenes a little bit and walk you through some of the sort of hands-on challenges that we face in this process of trying to automate news. And we're going to walk you through a case that we were working on last week. Weather is something that we have been covering since day one, basically, but we recently wanted to sort of refactor this coverage a little bit, and we're going to take you through some of the thinking that went into this. So what we do in here is basically we take monthly and weekly weather data from the Meteorological Institute, SMHI. So data on temperatures day by day, and we in this case produce a monthly article describing what the weather was like last month. And as a sort of as a starting point for all our processes, or when we take on a new topic, we sort of always start from this question: what's the story? I would say that this is something of a like really close to the essence of what it is being a journalist. I don't know if any of you have any experience from journalists, but I remember from taking my first jobs in like local newspapers, for example, and I did research on some topic, you know, talked to interviewees, maybe gathered some data, and then I went up to my editor to say that I want to write a story about this and that. And the one question that the editor will always ask you is, okay, sounds good, but what's the story? What's the headline? So that's something that we are really trained to try to answer as journalists. And this is something that we at Newsworthy try to do as well, but we try to do it in an automated fashion. So we try to teach computers to determine what the story is in practice. What's the story? What would be a story in temperature data? So to be really hands-on, our process in this case starts in just a Google document where we sort of list potential headlines. What would be a headline about temperatures? Well, obviously, if it happened to be the warmest November in a certain municipality in a certain number of years, that would be a story. Or if it was considerably warmer or colder than usual, that would be a story. And then we almost always also have a sort of backup template for if nothing particular newsworthy happened, then we at least write something just describing what the weather was like. And we're going to zoom in specifically a little bit on one of these sort of narratives or questions and the thinking that goes into this. So, because it might sound sort of simple to just be able to say if the weather was warmer or colder than usual, but there are actually like several decisions that you have to do and make before you're able to get to that conclusion. So here's a timeline of observed temperatures in Stockholm in November since 1756. So in this specific context, we got some lovely historic time series in certain parts of the country that's really quite extraordinary to work with. And looking at a time series like this, we can ask ourselves, well, what's warmer than normal? The most obvious answer would probably be to just look at the mean temperature for all these years and determine if the latest temperature was above or below this historic mean. The problem, however, with this approach is the fact that if you look at Stockholm, for example, these temperatures are measured in Observatoria Lunden in Vasastan, and going back to the 18th century, Observatoria Lunden looked something like this. So the microclimate has changed quite a bit in this case. So So the observations today are not necessarily like fully comparable to the ones 200 years ago. So just determining sort of what's normal is not necessarily as straightforward as one would. Oh, sorry, Adobe wants to update itself. See if I can get back. Yeah. So just determining what's normal is not necessarily as straightforward as as you might think. So what we do and what SMHI does is to define normal as rather the average temperature between 1961 to 1990, which is actually a little bit higher than the full time series mean. The point really that I want to make with this example is not so much about historical temperatures, but rather about the fact that we always, in every new topic, have to make these decisions about what comparisons we make. In a completely different context, we're working with reported crime, for example, and we want to try to answer the question, has reported crime in a certain municipality increased or decreased? And the answer in this case is, well, it depends. Here we're looking at reported violent crime in the municipality of Kumla. And going back 1 year, we see that there's a decrease in crime. Going back 5 years, we see that it's a pretty steady level. And going back 15 years, we can clearly see that there's an increase in reported crime. And the point I want to make with this example is that when we're trying to automate the process of writing an article like this, we have to make all these editorial decisions on what to compare to what, and in doing that comparison, what do we call an increase, for example. So we learned that the average temperature in Stockholm in November is 2.5 degrees. That's normal, but what would 2.6 degrees then be? Would we call that warmer than usual, or would we call it about normal? And how much warmer would it have to be much warmer than usual? These are the kind of questions that we need to formalize into to code and give like very specific thresholds. And often when I talk about automation, I realize that I'm sort of giving the impression maybe that all of this happens with some kind of magic. You sort of throw numbers into a black box and then a text pops out, but I'd say that we're quite far from that kind of future. So there are like a whole range of these kind of editorial decisions that we have to make before we end up with an actual article. And one of the things we learned when designing these algorithms for news is to try to keep those rules as simple as possible. We can get back to that later, but I want to pass on to Clara here, who's working more with the visualization part of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Jens. So I'm going to share my screen now as well. There we go. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, so all the things that Jens has been talking about with when it comes to kind of text and articles, those all apply obviously to the charts that we make as well. We want our charts to tell a story about the data that we're working with. We want our charts to hopefully grab our audience. And achieving those things when we're producing them automatically in this way poses some specific challenges. And I thought that the best way to kind of illustrate this would be to kind of walk you through the steps that we took when creating these the weather charts, or the charts for the weather report that Jens was talking about, and kind of talk you through our thought processes for those. So this is the kind of starting where we started out with our with the charts that we made for the weather report. Don't panic, this is not the finished chart. There's obviously quite a lot of information missing here. But what we're looking at here is a time series showing the temperature in November for a specific weather station in Sweden. And since we wanted to, as Jens mentioned, we wanted to give our weather reports more of a kind of a climate context. So we wanted to not just show the actual temperature for each day. We wanted to say, well, how does that compare to normal? So we also have in this chart a black line that shows what the average historical temperature has been, and then how much the temperature for each day, how much warmer or colder the temperature every day is compared to that, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And I'm gonna start adding some more layers of information to this chart now. So the first thing that this needs is kind of some kind of subtitle that tells us what we are looking at to start with. So I'm adding in a subtitle here. So basically this is saying these are the days when the temperature at the weather station Guibourg were warmer or colder than usual, than compared to the historical average. And the first thing that kind of leaps out at me when looking at this data is that it looks as though the temperature was actually warmer than usual every day in November. So I would say that that's the story here. So I want to put that as my chart title. So the title is November was warmer than usual every day. Now this is obviously something that's going to be dependent on what the data actually shows for each plot, for each weather station, for each month that we produce these charts. It might change. Maybe in Stockholm, the weather station actually only had, it was only warmer than usual 20 days, or maybe next month in Guibourg, it will be colder than usual. The title will have to change. And now you might think that we've kind of made things a little bit more unnecessarily difficult for ourselves here, and we could have just saved ourselves quite a lot of trouble by making the chart title something more straightforward. Like we could have just had, this is what the weather's been like in November as our chart title, and that would have worked for every chart that we produced, and we wouldn't have had to worry about adapting it dynamically. But we don't really want to do that, because we want to make sure to use the chart title to kind of help us to tell the story about the data. We actually know that chart titles are really important for communicating information. I'm going to take a break from this chart that I'm showing you now and show you a different chart to demonstrate this. So this is showing the results of a study that was done a couple of years back, when people were asked to look at a bunch of charts and then afterwards describe them to the researchers and describe what they remembered from them, what they had understood from it, and what kind of different, mention the different graphical elements that they could remember from them. And as you can see, the title was by far the most frequently mentioned. So the chart title is super important. I'm sure this won't be news for many of you. but it's often something good to kind of remind oneself of. So it's very important for making your chart more memorable and for kind of conveying the information more effectively. So we really don't want to waste that space, right? We don't want to waste it by having a title that doesn't really describe the data as, you know, in the best possible way. So we actually do want to have this. We want to go to the trouble of having this kind of dynamic title that will describe this specific place in the specific month. So this is nearly a finished chart. I just think that it's missing a few annotations to help the reader kind of understand what they're looking at more quickly. So first of all, we need to understand what kind of this line is, the average temperature. So I'm adding in a little text annotation for that. Again, this is something that needs to be dynamic because it will need to adapt depending on what the actual data shows. And then finally, I want to add in a text annotation that kind of helps people make sense of what they're looking at, and also kind of grabs their attention and directs it towards the most important, most salient points. So we're kind of highlighting the warmest day in each time series. And again, that's something that needs to be dynamic. I guess that's kind of my main point, that we try to make as many of our chart elements as possible dynamic, and we do that to make sure that we're kind of telling the best possible story about the data, and one that will be locally relevant to the people using it, to the report that we send out. So we produce our charts in code. I work in R, the programming language R, and there's a couple of like obvious benefits to this, which I've kind of tried to pick out the main ones. The first thing, obviously, is that it's very easy to update, which is key for us since we send out kind of regular updates on different topics, you know, whether it's a new update every month or once a week or even once a day with some of the Corona stuff that we've been doing. So it wouldn't work for us to kind of be doing manual updates of things, but when you're working with scripts, it's kind of a game changer, because all you need to do to create a new chart is to just update the data that you're using and rerun the script, and it will be updated. So it kind of saves us a lot of time there. The other thing, kind of similarly, is that it's very easy to scale up, which again is very important when you need to make many versions of the same thing. So once you've written a function that defines what you want your chart to look like, it doesn't take any more effort to create that chart for all the 290 municipalities rather than just the one. So here's a few more examples of the charts that we send out with the weather reports. Finally, it's very the way that it's very flexible, and so we work in, again, I make all my charts in R, and more specifically with the kind of add-on package ggplot. But we also have we've built our own kind of custom package that makes it possible for us to add our own style easily to all charts, and kind of to add our logo in the bottom right corner, things like that. Basically to make sure that we can have like a chart that's ready for publication, that we make from start to finish in R, so that we don't have to do any kind of manual tweaks in Illustrator or anything like that, which wouldn't be feasible to scale up. So you might be wondering what the kind of strange looking chart is that I'm showing you here. So this is showing the number of Corona cases in the latest week for each Swedish municipality, and the change compared to the week before. And it does look a little bit funny, and that's because this is the default style that you get when you make charts in R, in ggplot. It's it's quite a hideous sort of default style. But the reason I show this is because it is the good news is that it's very easy to change. It's possible to change all of these little elements and make it look exactly the way that you want. So it's quite flexible in that way. And so because we have our kind of custom package, it's actually possible for us to change from this kind of strange default style to the finished chart with just one line of code, literally. So it's quite easy and like easily flexible. So yeah, so I guess kind of to just sort of hammer the point home, the kind of main point for us is to make sure that we're telling the best possible story about the data that we're working with. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, and yeah, thanks for sharing your learnings. Super interesting to hear how you are working with all of this, and it's great that you could join the meetup to talk about this. We have received some questions, so I'm gonna read them out, and then you guys decide who wants to answer. Which tools do you use for building the pipelines? Because Jens mentioned in the beginning that you were automating the production of the articles. So what are the tools?
Yes, so we are mostly in a Python environment. So all the components for like collecting data, analyzing data, and then yes, so all of that is built in a Python environment. The articles we generate in a tool that we developed ourselves, sort of node-based tool, and we write those articles. I don't know if anyone happen to be familiar with the syntax language Pug for Node. So we actually use that to write articles, and then as Clara touched upon a little bit, she's working in R for data analysis and chart generation. My experience is that R and ggplot is quite a lot more developed than Python and Matplotlib for data visualization. It's a headache every time for me to work in Python and Matplotlib.
Thank you. So Tyler was asking if writing articles based on data sounds like something that could be done with AI, if you're looking into that.
Yes, Clara, do you think that's possible?
So I would say that it's a lot more kind of like we talk about automation, but I would say that it's a lot more manual work than kind of something more in the realms of kind of AI. As Jens showed in that kind of little code snippet, most of what we do is really just kind of sort of fancy if-else logic within code. I don't know if you would disagree with that, Jens.
Yeah, no, I'm a bit skeptical regarding like the near-term possibilities for natural language generation in this context. Like mostly because it's you really have to be quite specific with words, and yeah, words, phrasing, and it cannot be like mostly correct. It has to be correct. So and I struggle to see any AI solution being able to do that in the near term future.
Yeah, so I guess your approach makes it much easier to explain to the people that are consuming articles of like how you are producing them and what are the rules that you define, for example, as you mentioned, for defining what you're comparing to and things like that.
I think that's a very good point, and it goes into like one of the slides that I showed about trying to be simple. When we started out this Newsworthy project, like our initial pitch was actually more about using like Bayesian models for anomaly detection to find the news. So we started out with a statistician who helped us build fairly fancy models for detecting anomalies and trends, and then use those anomalies to write articles. But it turned out to be quite difficult to just explain what we found. So if you have a fancy model that tells us that, well, this is certainly like a trend or an anomaly, then if it's just a sort of a black box that's picking up that, it's almost impossible to explain in words what happened. So that's why we're trying to. So we sort of resorted to much more basic analysis typically, but at the benefit of I think being more transparent and understandable with what we do.
And what has been the response from the customers so far?
No, it's difficult, but I generally think that we are doing things better now, and I think it's been like initially I thought that there would be sort of value in itself in being sort of advanced in terms of methodology. Now I think more of that advancedness as necessary evil rather than a good in itself. So we're trying to keep things as simple as possible in all cases in terms of like analysis.
And another question from Matthias was regarding the variables that you use, if it's only the geography or if you can customize other variables as well.
Yes, we've been working with geography, but mostly because that's been our niche and sort of low-hanging fruits. But in theory, we could personalize on other variables as well.
And do you automate the chart titles somehow also, or is it the manual part?
So the logic of it works in a similar way to the way that the kind of news articles are built up. Again, it's kind of built up with a typical kind of if-else logic. So in that, it's automation in that sense. And kind of the main thing is that they vary depending on what the data actually contains, what it shows.
And I guess everyone's curious about like data handling beforehand. So one question from Patrick is, how do you handle outliers in the data set?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I would say that there's quite a lot of manual checking that goes into it, in the same way that we would approach any kind of data analysis project. That you do have to kind of sense check outliers.
Do you have to do that then for every municipality, or if you have some sort of a way to scan the data quickly and check for anomalies for every municipality?
So I guess I would say that the biggest task is when we're setting up a new topic and kind of getting acquainted with it. And that's when you kind of have to put most effort into checking outliers, checking that you understand what the data contains and what it is actually showing. And once you kind of have something up and running, which is producing like regular reports on a topic, it tends to be kind of less work for that.
Mm.
But I mean, it's a good point that if it's an error in the data, then there's going to be an error in the article and in the visualization as well. And there's not going to be. We can try to catch some of those by by throwing errors if something seems like an obvious unrealistic anomaly, but another more sort of pragmatic approach is to just also be transparent with the fact that these articles are generated from data, and hopefully then the reader or the consumer of the story have some forgiveness for the fact that data errors would become article errors as well.
All right, then there's also a bit of a related question from Tor. If you are using public APIs and whether the articles are only supported for Sweden. And when it comes to APIs, I'm also thinking if the data ingestion is automated, then how do you control for these potential errors in the incoming data or some breakages there?
Yeah, so we mostly work with public available data. To some extent, we're working with data that was created to a lesser extent, in some case, been acquired in another way through a FOIA request or something, but primarily with publicly available data. And I would say that we're like in some of the pipelines that we do regularly, we are almost fully automated, and I'm like on weather, for example, or unemployment numbers and stuff that we've done for some time. I'm quite comfortable with like the quality in data in those contexts. But there's we've certainly been challenging with like in data quality as well. For example, this spring when we were tracking COVID cases with scrapers and stuff, and like data quality was more of a challenge.
Mm. All right. Yeah. Thanks again so much for sharing. And I guess if anyone else has questions, both of you are in the Slack group, so yeah, I hope that people can answer or ask your questions there. So the second part that we were planning is to make it more open and give anyone the opportunity to share what you're working on at the moment, or maybe even thinking about some projects, or if you have certain challenges. So kind of open up the floor for anyone to share whatever you are working with. So if you are interested in that, please write in the chat as well, so we can see that and organize it a bit. So really no pressure. It could be anything in any stage. Yeah. Okay. Patrick wants to share some stuff. Please go ahead. Curious to see what you have.
All right. Hi, everyone. Whoa, that background was horrible. Give me a second. That didn't work. That's also bad, but at least you can see me now. So I work at Aftonbladet, so I do data visualization there. And I am preparing a talk for tomorrow on how to use Svelte and data visualization. So, and I've been stealing a lot of ideas from Matthias, right? He has a great talk on that as well. But I just want to share a screen on what I was planning to show. And we'll see. I just wanted to show it to you and see, well, basically I just wanted to show it. So there you go. Somebody has to see it. So this is made with Svelte. And it has a whole bunch of fun stuff with it that I'm gonna demonstrate at work, basically. So it has transitions and animations and stuff. And I just wanted to show that it's pretty easy to make stuff like this, even when you do custom coding. So I guess this map took me from actually getting the data and producing it 4 hours to do. So if you want to do something custom, it still takes a bit of a time, right? But if you just want to do, if you want to do something, if I wanted to do something that's regular, then I just use a mapping library, right? So that would be minutes. But I still think 3 or 4 hours or whatever it took me to get from data to visualization and making it as clean as possible so people can understand the source code. For me, at least, it felt impressive. So that's just what I wanted to show. And I mean, if anyone has any questions about Svelte and data visualization, you can always give me a ping in the chat, either on the Slack channel or here. So.
Really cool. I like the colors.
Yeah, I did. I'll tell you the secret how I started it. So for you that are older like me, you will understand this. So I searched for color palette war games, and that's how I found it. So I'm an 80s kid. Sometimes you have to start somewhere.
I love that you say you're from the 80s and you're older. You brat.
Well, I'm older than almost everyone that works.
Yeah, nice chart. Nice chart. Nice done.
Thanks.
Yeah, I wrote a question there. So what were the benefits of using Svelte in your experience? Why did you pick that?
All right, Svelte is a JavaScript framework for composing front-end. It's a front-end library, basically, for a framework for making apps. And one of the advantages over other frameworks that I've used is actually it's extremely clean and easy to use. Like there are larger ones that are more popular as well, but they add a whole bunch of other stuff that you need to learn to use the language. I've onboarded some developers on Svelte recently, and they've been able to code in less than a couple of hours to understand what they're doing. If you want to know the ins and outs, that's a couple of days, basically. And then maybe if you need to learn a bit more about patterns, how to code it, it takes longer. But it's really easy, and it's made by, basically for this case, for work that I work with now for newspapers, where you make small to medium-sized front-end applications, maybe some interactions and maybe some visualizations and stuff. So that was the reason why it was built to start with. So, yeah. And it's easier to use than starting with D3, I would say. If anyone wants to start with that, then good luck. It is quite a bump going up. But if you combine the data processing of D3 with showing components, then if you have programmed some, this is really easy.
Oh, looks curious. Thanks for sharing.
May I bump in with a question?
Sure.
Have you considered or tried using GeoPandas for that?
So that would be a Python thing, I'm guessing, since it's pandas in the name.
Uh-huh.
No, I haven't. Mostly because I wanted to share stuff on the internet, and I'm not. Yeah, I wouldn't say you can share anything on the web easily from with just a pandas package. But no.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Just curious.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matthias.
Yes, we were speaking of Sword. I didn't want to show anything today because, but well, I can show you something which I finished earlier this year or last year, basically, which is also done with Svelte. Wait. All right. So this was a personal project which called 30 Days to Take Off, because that was done last year when I still lived in Stockholm, and from time to time I flew from Stockholm to Frankfurt in Germany. And I always wondered if it makes a difference when I book my flights like 30 days ahead, or when I book them just 1 or 2 days before takeoff. And so I started collecting data from Google Flights, basically. So I had a little Raspberry Pi running, collecting flight prices every day for a period of 3 months between April and June 2019. And what you can do, you can now here select like a departure date, for example, Sunday, 14th of April. And every line here is a flight that goes from Stockholm to Frankfurt at that day, or that went at that day. So it's in the past already now. And what you can see here is like then in the register prices when you book 30 days ahead, or when you just book 1 day ahead. And you can see how that varies in this 30-day period. And of course, you would think that when you book early, it's cheaper than when you book late. And that is usually also the case. So for example, here you see that it starts quite low. So you can also click on those. Then you get the prices. So this flight here starts at 167 euros. But when you book just 1 day before, you would pay 601 euros. So this is the data I collected there. And it's quite interesting because in that data set were a lot of different stories hidden. So for example, when I go to May, it was here in the beginning. This was the Easter weekend. And you can see that it was really good when you have booked your flight very early, because it was rather cheap. That one also stayed cheap because that's like the late ones. And a lot of people who go from Stockholm to Frankfurt, they want to change to another plane to go somewhere else. And when you fly that late, you don't get another plane, and so no one wants to book that one. But when you go to other flights, so let me just select that one, for example, which is the morning one, that started at 167, and there was like 2 days before it was at almost 1,000 euros, which is quite a span. So that was quite, so this is like the Easter weekend. And when we go to Midsummer weekend, I think it was around that, yeah. So you see that there it tends to be that the flights are also very expensive 30 days ahead, because, okay, everyone wants to go somewhere when midsummer is beginning in Sweden. And yeah, so that was a very nice project. And it was, for me, it was a little bit also to learn Svelte and to combine different technologies. So most of that here below, the brushing, this is just SVG graphics, whereas the lines here are drawn on canvas pixel by pixel, because I wanted to select also a lot and to keep that quite reactive. Then you can't do this as SVG graphics, you need to use canvas. And yeah, that's the project. So it's also public, you can check that out. You can link it to the chat.
Really nice. and so we're, I guess, very practical for your own purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, in the beginning, I tried to find like pricing rules maybe that are hidden in the data, but that was really hard. So you saw that the variance is quite random, more or less, for us to see. So there is some rules in when you dive deeper into data analysis there, but it's really hard to predict flight prices.
Did you change your buying behavior based on that?
Not really, no. I mean, I only flew like once or twice per year. So it was not that often. And it was usually, I tried to avoid these hotspots like Easter weekends and midsummer weekends. So, but I knew that before, of course. But anyway, it was just interesting to see how these prices behave. And later I learned that that Lufthansa, for example, has a team of 20 people or so that are only doing data science to determine flight prices all the time. So yeah, quite interesting.
So just a question, have you tried any other frameworks for making the front-end stuff before? Or did you just go for Svelte, the first thing that popped up?
No, I did Vue before. This is also very nice, but as you said before, Svelte is just easier and more lightweight. And you get going with Svelte very fast. And it's also, yeah, it's made by a data viz guy, Rich Harris, who's at the New York Times. So I think it was a little bit also built for data visualization, maybe. And he uses it at the New York Times. If you go to the Corona charts of the NY Times, for example, they are also built with Svelte. And yeah, for now I work as data risk designer also. There it often depends also on the client. So when they have like already built everything in React, for example, then I need to do it in React. But I don't like it that much, I have to say, because React is very cumbersome when you know how Svelte works.
Svelte, the syntax I noticed looks a lot like Vue. I mean, what's like the big difference there between them?
The big difference is that Vue and React and all these frameworks, they are really frameworks where you ship the whole library to interpret what you've written also to the client, right? You need to ship this JavaScript file where all the Vue intrinsics are in, whereas Svelte is a compiler. So the syntax is a bit different. There is also language elements used which are not JavaScript or HTML because it's compiled at build time, and then you get just like literally one JavaScript file that has all the reactivity inside, and then you send that to the client. So this is basically the big difference. So framework versus compiler. Yeah.
Can I ask about the design? What made you? Because I'm always interested in why people do choose what they want to do. So why the circle and all the lines? It feels like it could be a straight line graph straight across.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there were two underlying decisions because I'm always looking after analogies of the data to something that people already know. And this circular thing here, let me share my screen again. So the circle here looks a little bit like a clock, so like a timer that you start here and stop here, and that's like the running time from 30 days to 0 when you have the departure. And the second thing is it looked a little bit like a plane engine, and I tried to support this by the effect here when you click on those, so that you get this spiraling effect that resembles to a plane engine. That was basically the decisions underneath, but yeah, I don't know if you've seen more of my works. I really like circular plots. I end up very often with circular plots. I don't know if it's like the perfectness of the circle or something, but I really like this type of visualization. And here it also fitted to to the analogy of the data.
No, always interesting to hear about other people's metaphor. I'm struggling with one at the moment. I don't know if anyone else wants to share something, because I have a very, like I'm in the embarrassing stage of my project. I'm still sketching and thinking about how to represent the data. So could maybe show what I'm thinking about as well, to lower the bar of what has been presented so far. So I'm working on street rename, like analyzing the street names, and I want to look at how the renaming has been happening in history. So there has been different reasons for renaming certain streets, and there has been some ways. So, for example, it is a street or a city in the south of Russia. So there are certain periods in history, like for example, in the 20s, when the communists were in power, they decided to rename all the pre-communist era names. And later on in the 30s, there was some communists that fell out of favor, and their names have been removed. So there was another wave. Then after the Second World War, you have a wave of military names. And like so far, I've been trying to show it in this way. So having something like a timeline with the streets going out as lines for all the new streets. And then when there is a renaming wave, there is like all the new streets here and all the ones that have been replaced on the other side, and the possibility to maybe highlight one of them and see, yeah, so like one line should be one street, its previous name and its new name. I also try to like see how maybe could use the wave metaphor here, but I'm still in the process of finalizing the data set. It takes time to get all the information, but I'm not sure if this is actually going to work, like putting all the new names on the one side of the axis and the ones that are getting removed on the other side. So this is kind of where I am at the moment, trying to find the metaphor to make it work.
Have you thought about linking like the same streets from the right to the left side and then back to the right side, if those are the same streets?
Yeah, so probably on hover, or maybe making them a bit more connected, so it makes it easier to see that this is actually the same street. And I was thinking to use the length of the line as a way to encoding the length of the street, because the longer the street, usually the more important it is, and the more like prominent person they pick, and therefore it's okay to make it more visually sticky. So this is just to in case anyone was feeling too shy to show what they're working on. This is like a super raw stage of the project. And very inspiring to hear what you guys are working on, because I was also thinking to make it make something on the web, and wasn't sure what to use. So now I have some things to look into.
I might recommend D3.
Working on it. All right, should we wrap up? Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you for sharing. I hope that we can organize another meetup in the beginning of January or middle of January. Beginning is probably will be difficult. So hope to see you then.
Yes, thanks for joining, everyone. It was great doing this with you guys. It's a little bit of an experiment as our first one, but hope you guys had a good time.
Yeah, thanks for organizing. It was great.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thanks. All right.
Bye.
Bye everyone.